Hold back your feet! Hold back your feet! Touch the bottom of my voice! You're on your knees! On your knees!
Help me. A faint cry echoed through the dark, cold hallways of an Atlanta apartment complex. A young woman knocked on each door, her hands bloody, her breathing labored as she raced for her life. But all the doors were closed. No one opened them, no one spoke. And then, she collapsed, just steps from her own apartment door. When the police arrived, they found the lifeless body of Ashley Burton, a talented hairstylist, a transgender woman, and a beacon of light in the community. But what happened in that small apartment that turned an ordinary evening into tragedy? Ashley Burton's story begins on a gloomy morning on the 11th of April, 2023, at the Elite at City Park Apartments. Before the sun had even risen, the residents of the building were startled by a frantic knock on the door. A weak, trembling voice rang out. "Please, help me." Those were Ashley's last moments, before she collapsed in the middle of the hallway, just a few short steps from safety. For many, Ashley's death was an unimaginable shock. But to fully understand this tragedy, we must rewind time, back to the days when she was alive, still laughing and still dreaming. Ashley was born in the American South, into a family that was not wealthy but warm. Her childhood was associated with afternoons sitting on the porch, listening to the sound of rain falling, the smell of wet grass mixed with the laughter of her siblings. From a young age, Ashley discovered two things that made her different: her skillful hands that could turn hair into art, and her desire to be her true self, without hiding or fear. As an adult, Atlanta became a promised land. It was a city where the lights of hair salons stayed on until late at night, where different people could confidently wear their own identities. In her small office, Ashley did more than cut hair, curl, or apply makeup. She gave her customers confidence, so that each person could look in the mirror and see a better version of themselves. What version of yourself do you want to be today? Ashley's familiar question made many people come back, not only because of her technique, but also because of her gentleness and warmth. Family and friends loved Ashley because she never lived half-heartedly. Her brother Patrick was always there to take care of her, and Ivory, her cousin, who is also a transgender woman, became her spiritual support. To them, Ashley is a light that never goes out. In the eyes of her clients, she is a symbol of confidence and sincerity. But beneath that perfect shell, Ashley's life is not peaceful. The line between clients, friends, and ambiguous relationships is often very fragile. Some people text her after hours, others act gallant, but in return they control her, demanding to know her location every hour. Ashley politely refuses, but that politeness is sometimes mistaken for agreement. Among the faces around her, one name stands out: Darius Mills, a man who used to appear in Ashley's apartment late at night, not a stranger but never clear. People don't know if they have a romantic relationship or just a vague acquaintance, but one thing is certain: Mills's presence is always associated with tension that Ashley tries to hide. The night of the 11th of April started peacefully. Soft music played in the apartment. The two talked as usual. But then, when the phone screen lit up, Mills began to demand, "Show me, just to put my mind at ease." Ashley shook his head, gently but firmly. "The phone is my business." Just that one sentence turned the atmosphere into a stifling one. Mills grabbed the phone, And when the text messages and photos inside revealed Ashley's true life, a transgender woman living openly, his face darkened. Prejudice, anger, all of it exploded in an instant. Ashley tried to grab it back. Give it back to me. But the phone had now become evidence of an existence that Mills did not accept. In a decisive second, he pulled out his gun. The shot rang out, dry, decisive, like a long-prepared sentence. Ashley staggered, blood seeping through his shirt. But her survival instincts remained. She rushed out the door, ran down the hallway, knocked on each apartment door in the faint hope that someone would open it. However, they were all closed, and just a few minutes later, she collapsed, leaving the whole city of Atlanta with a question. Why didn't those doors open? There are many other details behind this incident that will leave you speechless. If you find it worth listening to, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. In Ashley's small apartment, the atmosphere was initially normal. She had just finished a long day of work. The room still smelled of hairspray. R&B music was playing softly from the Bluetooth speaker on the table. On the sofa, Darius Mills sat calmly, his eyes following Ashley's every move as if searching for something. They talked about trivial things, asked about her health, about tomorrow's plans. It wasn't a noisy conversation. On the contrary, it was too peaceful. The kind of fragile peace like the surface of a lake before a rock was thrown. Then Ashley's phone screen lit up. A small, normal notification. But in Mills's eyes, it was like a spark catching fire in a tank of gasoline. He leaned over, pointed. Let me see. I just want to know, to be sure. Ashley paused. Her voice still had the familiar gentleness, but this time, it was a bit firm. The phone is my personal business. It was a seemingly harmless remark, but to Mills, it felt like a slap. He smiled awkwardly, stepped closer, and then, in a moment of impulse, snatched the phone from her hand. The light from the screen fell on his face. His fingers slid through the series of messages, photos, work plans. And then, he stopped. The daily confidences, the photos Ashley proudly shared about herself, about her journey to live as her true gender, about her life as a transgender woman, were like a mirror reflecting the truth that Mills could not accept. His eyes turned cold. From a friend, an ambiguous companion, Mills had now turned into a self-appointed judge. In his mind, the prejudices, the rumors, the distorted stories about transgender people that society had stuffed into him for so long, suddenly flooded back. In front of him now was no longer Ashley, a friend, a talented stylist, but only a distorted image created by prejudice. Ashley reached out, her voice tense but calm. Give it back to me. The phone suddenly became a battlefield. On one side was privacy and dignity. On the other was possession and anger. Mills took a half-step back, holding the phone as if it were evidence of an accusation. Who let you live like this? Why? He growled, but did not really wait for an answer. In the small space, the atmosphere was thick. Ashley stepped back, her eyes still fixed on the gun that had just flashed from the waist of Mills's pants. She realized he was pulling it out, his hand shaking but his eyes fierce. Don't do it, Ashley pleaded. It's my life, it's me. Don't take it away. But to someone who was already immersed in prejudice, every word at this moment was like pouring gasoline on the fire. The gunshot rang out. Clean, dry, and sharp. The bullet pierced the air, leaving an echo that made the whole room stop breathing. Ashley recoiled, her hand reflexively covering her face, blood starting to stain her shirt. She didn't scream, there was only a sharp intake of breath, as if trying to swallow the pain. In that moment, Ashley knew she had to leave the apartment immediately. If she stayed, there would be no more chances. The door swung open. She rushed into the hallway, her legs shaking but still trying to run. Her hands pounded on each door, the sound of her fists echoing. "Please help me." Someone opened the door. The hallway was long and narrow. The sensor lights turned on with each step she took. Behind her, Mills walked slowly out, his shadow imprinted on the white wall, watching like a ghost. In each apartment, someone jumped up, walked towards the eye. They saw the image of a woman covered in blood, saw the man standing silently in the distance, but instead of opening the door, they closed the peephole screen, their hearts pounding, their hearts filled with fear. Opening the door might invite danger into the house. Ashley continued to knock. Once, twice, 3 times. The cries for help gradually faded. Her voice was hoarse, turning into a moan. Her breathing was heavy, as if each step was a life or death struggle. Behind her, Mills continued to walk slowly, not running, not rushing, like a hunter who knew his prey was exhausted. An apartment flashed. Someone asked, "Who is it?" Ashley struggled. "Please, I need help." But then the door fell silent again. No sound of a lock turning, no hands pulling her inside. Ashley fell to her knees, her hands supporting herself against the wall, her eyes dimly seeing the flashing exit sign in the distance. Just a few more steps, but her legs no longer obeyed. She fell, her body limp, blood streaking red on the cold tile floor. Just a few steps from her own apartment door, she gave up. The hallway was quiet again. The wind whistled through the cracks of the door. The lights flickered, as if nothing had happened. Only the body of a woman lay motionless, and the shadow of a man half hidden in the security camera's view. When the police arrived, everything was too late. Ashley had stopped breathing. They recorded the scene. Bloodstains all over the hallway, handprints on the door, and especially the missing phone. What makes a person pull the trigger just because they see the truth about another person? And more heartbreakingly, why are so many doors silent when a life needs it most? There are many other details behind this incident that will make you speechless. If you find it worth listening to, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. When the police arrived, it was just before 5 a.m. The hallways of the elite at City Park apartment complex were lit up by the flashing blue and red lights of patrol cars. But inside, everything remained eerily quiet. Ashley's body lay motionless on the cold tile floor, just steps away from her own apartment. It was a heartbreaking image. The line between life and death can sometimes be so short. The door to her apartment was still ajar. There was no sign of a break-in from the outside. In the living room, the sofa was out of place. The tablecloth was on the floor. A can of hairspray was still lying around. All of it suggested a scenario. The conflict did not come from outside, but began right inside the apartment. The field technicians began their meticulous work. They took photos, marked every bloodstain that ran down the hallway, noted bloody handprints on the doorknobs of several apartments, and then returned to the starting point, Ashley's apartment. What caught their attention most was not the disturbances, but what was missing: the phone. In modern society, A person's phone is almost a living diary. It records every text message, call, photo, appointment. The disappearance of the phone not only makes the investigation more difficult, but also serves as a silent confession that the killer did not want to leave any traces. Outside in the hallway, officers knocked on each apartment door. Many residents said they heard knocking, running footsteps, but they were too afraid to open the door. Some admitted to looking through the peephole, seeing the silhouette of a wounded woman, but also chose to remain silent out of fear. These confessions made the police bitter. If only one door had been opened, perhaps everything would have been different. The police reconstructed the timeline. Around 4:20 a.m., the first noise came from Ashley's apartment. At 4:25 a.m., some residents heard knocking on the door and cries for help. At 4:30 a.m., gunshots, then silence. By the time the police got the call and arrived at the scene, Ashley was gone. The investigation expanded. The technical team collected fingerprints from the doorknob, the table, and even the displaced sofa. Small bloodstains along the hallway were numbered, each drop a part of the story left behind. Hallway and parking lot cameras were pulled. The footage was unclear, but it still showed a tall, thin man walking silently out of Ashley's apartment at the fateful moment. Meanwhile, the forensic team began analyzing. The bullet was determined to be a 9mm. The murder weapon was not found, but the trajectory indicated that the killer had fired from very close range, almost face to face. That further confirmed the theory. This was not a random break-in or robbery. It was the result of a direct confrontation between two acquaintances. From there, the important question arose. Who was in the apartment that early morning? Investigators began to reach out to Ashley's friends and relatives. They described her as a cautious person who rarely let strangers into her home and never opened the door to anyone after midnight. That narrowed the circle of suspects. Whoever was in the apartment was definitely someone Ashley knew, at least enough to let her through the door. The first name to come up was Darius Mills, a name that several friends had heard Ashley mention, sometimes in confusion, sometimes in distress. Some said Ashley had complained about Mills's excessive demands, his controlling texts, even his showing up at odd hours. When the police ran a background check, they discovered that Mills was no stranger. He had a criminal record, had been in minor trouble, and, most notably, was banned from owning a gun. This information added to the suspicious picture. If the killer used a 9mm, and Mills was not allowed to own a weapon, then his presence in Ashley's apartment was no longer just a question, but a crucial link. Investigators continued to track down the contact records. Although Ashley's phone was missing, the carrier provided records of calls and texts from around the time of the murder, and Mills's number appeared repeatedly in those records, especially late at night. The picture began to emerge. Ashley was with Mills that night. They had an argument. The missing phone was the cause, and the evidence was erased. And the gunshot, the one that ended Ashley's life, may have been an act of anger and prejudice, as Mills learned more about her identity. But when investigators reached Mills, he was no longer out in the world. Ironically, Mills was in the Fulton County Jail for another incident. This fact was both a relief to the police and a strange one. If the prime suspect was in jail, how could he be involved? But the arrest records show that Mills was arrested only after the Ashley murder, and the timing matches perfectly. That means that on that fateful night, he was completely free. The clues are clear, But there is still an important piece missing: Ashley's phone. It has completely disappeared, leaving no trace, as if swallowed into space. And that is the most vivid evidence that the killer not only wanted to kill, but also erased the victim's last words. But why? Just to hide a message? Or is there something darker, hidden behind that cold, bright screen? There are many other details of this investigation that will leave you speechless. If you think this is a story that needs to be told, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Nearly 2 months after Ashley Burton's death, the case file was growing thicker by the day. Little pieces of bloodstain, a blurry photo, a half-hearted confession were pieced together like a giant jigsaw puzzle. And as the picture began to emerge, they all pointed to one name. Mills was not initially the prime suspect. He had been in and out of Ashley's apartment, but there was no direct evidence of guilt. But investigators did not overlook the fact that Ashley was very careful about who entered his home. If anyone was sitting in the apartment in the early hours of the morning, it was definitely not a stranger. The call logs from the carrier revealed important clues. On the night of the 10th of April and the early morning of the 11th of April, Mills's number appeared repeatedly in Ashley's contact log. They texted and called back and forth, and the signal matched the location of Ashley's apartment building. At the same time, the hallway camera footage showed a tall, thin man in a dark shirt emerging from Ashley's apartment shortly after the gunshots. The image was not sharp, but when compared to Mills's description of his appearance, the coincidence was undeniable. Witnesses in the building also gradually opened up. At first, they were hesitant because of fear. But when they learned that the police had targeted a specific suspect, some began to give more details. They recalled the mournful knocking on the door, the sound of hurried footsteps, and the shadow of a man following Ashley in the hallway. Although no one dared to confirm that they had seen Mills pull the trigger, the account was enough to paint a picture of the fateful morning. Ashley running away, and the stalker determined not to let her escape. What made the police even more convinced was the mysterious disappearance of the phone. One witness said that after Ashley collapsed, the shadow of a man bent down to pick something up from the floor. Combined with the fact that the phone was not found, the hypothesis was that the killer not only wanted to kill, but also intentionally erased traces, depriving the victim of the last chance to call for help. While the investigators were focusing all their attention on Mills, an irony occurred. He was detained in the Fulton County Jail for an unrelated incident that took place shortly after Ashley's death. This, instead of eliminating him, made it easier for the police. They did not have to launch a tense manhunt, but could directly send a warrant to the detention facility. On the 6th of June, 2023, an official arrest warrant was issued. Mills was indicted on charges of murder, armed robbery, possession of a firearm while having a previous conviction, and use of a weapon during the commission of a crime. From here, the police's work was temporarily closed, leaving room for the prosecutor to build a case. And they knew that to convict someone like Mills, fragmentary evidence wasn't enough. They needed a seamless, unbroken picture. The case was laid out in sections. First came the physical evidence, the 9mm bullet that matched the gun Mills was suspected of using in another crime, the bloodstains along the hallway that matched the route Ashley ran. Then came the digital evidence, phone records that put Mills in the building at the same time the crime happened. Then came the eyewitness evidence. Residents heard screams for help. But more than the cold evidence, the prosecutors wanted the jury to know Ashley, a cautious, principled woman who loved her family and who had never invited strangers into her home in the middle of the night. That negated any possibility that the killer was random. They also delved into Mills's psychology. His record showed he had a criminal history, a history of violence, and most notably, a deep-seated prejudice against transgender people. Previous text messages were extracted, in which Mills was jealous, controlling, and repeatedly suspicious of Ashley. These details, taken together, turned into a portrait of a man who refused to accept the truth about his victim. The motive, therefore, was no longer just a petty dispute. It was a matter of possessiveness, control, and prejudice. The phone was just the spark. The real fire had been burning inside Mills for a long time. Anger at having to face a woman who was true to herself, despite the harsh gaze of society. However, there was a big question that troubled the prosecutor: how to prove this was a hate crime. The law required clear evidence that Mills had acted only because Ashley was a transgender woman. But beyond the phone revealing her true identity, beyond the angry look in Mills's eyes as she read the messages, there was nothing strong enough to warrant a legal record. The LGBTQ+ community in Atlanta was outraged. For them, there was no need for a legal record. They knew that Ashley was killed, not just because of a personal conflict, but because she dared to live her truth. They took to the streets, holding up Ashley's mugshot, calling for justice, demanding that the case be treated as a hate crime. In the small conference room of the prosecutor's office, people discussed for hours. Should they emphasize the hate factor, even though the evidence was not strong enough, or focus on the existing series of crimes, which were enough to put Mills in prison for life? In the end, they chose the sure path. To build a continuous picture, from the gunshot in the apartment to the desperate knock on the door, and the man's figure disappearing with the phone. And the question remains, for the jury, as well as for the community: does justice stop at convicting a person, or must it go further? Looking straight into the silence of the neighbors, at the doors that did not open, at the prejudice that contributed to Ashley's death? There are many details in the upcoming trial that will make you rethink the meaning of the two words, justice. If you find this story worth continuing, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. On the day of Darius Mills's trial, the Fulton County Courthouse was packed. The long hallway outside the courtroom echoed with the rapid footsteps of reporters and the constant clicking of cameras. In the first row, Ashley's family sat silently, clutching her framed photograph. Her brother Patrick bowed his head, his hands clenched and trembling, while her mother choked with tears, her eyes red. When Mills entered, wearing an orange prison uniform, his hands cuffed, the air in the room froze. He didn't bow his head, didn't dodge, but looked straight ahead, his eyes cold and incomprehensible. It wasn't the face of someone who felt remorse. It was the face of someone who knew it was all over, but didn't care. The prosecutor began with a firm voice. This was not an accident. This was a premeditated murder. The victim was shot in his own apartment, then chased down the hallway, desperately calling for help. But no one answered the door. And the person who caused this tragedy was the defendant, Darius Mills. Each piece of evidence was presented. Ballistics showed the bullet came from a 9mm gun, a weapon Mills was banned from owning. Cameras captured him leaving the apartment shortly after Ashley collapsed. Witnesses described a frantic knock on the door, the shadow of a man following the victim. And finally, phone records, calls, texts, GPS signals confirmed that Mills was there, at the fateful moment. The defense tried to turn the tables. They said circumstantial evidence, blurry photos, witnesses did not see Mills pull the trigger. They mentioned the principle, innocent until proven guilty, but against a coherent chain of events, those arguments faltered. What silenced the courtroom was when the prosecutors replayed Ashley's final minutes. They played the recording of the witness testimony. The frantic knocking on the door, the cries of, "Help me," echoing in the darkness. The jury bowed their heads, some wiping away tears. Ashley's family wept as they listened. Patrick held his cousin Ivory's hand, his voice choking. She knocked. Just needed a door to open. Finally, after days of deliberation, the jury retreated to the back of the room. The wait seemed like an eternity. Then they returned, and the verdict was read aloud. Guilty. Darius Mills was sentenced to life without parole for murder. 20 years for armed robbery. 10 years for 2 weapons charges. All on top of each other. He would never get out of jail again. The courtroom exploded with emotion. Ashley's family wept. Some friends hugged each other, both heartbroken and relieved. At least Ashley had been called by her name, but at the same time, everyone knew that the verdict would not bring her back. For Atlanta's LGBTQ+ community, the trial was more than a verdict. It was a stark reminder of a harsh reality. Trans women of color face far greater danger. They must contend not only with social stigma, but also with relationships that are fraught with control, violence, and silence. On social media, friends retweeted videos of Ashley's posts. Images of her doing a client's hair, her gentle smile in the mirror, her familiar line, "What version of yourself do you want to be today?" The clips now became a legacy, both beautiful and haunting. Ashley's family chose to forgive. They said in tears, "We don't want to carry hatred in our hearts. Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain, but it saves us from being imprisoned with the person who killed our daughter. But that forgiveness doesn't erase the lingering question, the question that haunts the whole society. Why didn't the doors open? Why did so many eyes see, so many ears hear, but no one had the courage to act?" Perhaps Ashley's tragedy lies not only in the bullet that Mills fired, but also in the collective silence. At the moment of the boundary between life and death, the only thing she needed was a hand to pull her inside. But that hand didn't come. The story ends in a cold hallway, where knocks on the door have faded into the past. But its echo still echoes. In the moment someone calls for help, do we dare to open the door? If you want to know more stories where justice, truth, and pain intersect, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.
Another TV on. Back. Driver, get out of the car! Driver, get out of the car! Morton, get out of the car! There's two. Okay, I didn't see her at all. Passenger, stay in the car! Driver, out of the car! Two. Out of the car, hands up! Walk backwards towards that side of my car, now! Turn around and walk backwards! Walk backwards! Walk backwards! Quit tensing up. Go through.
On summer nights in Detroit, sound travels. Laughter floats over fences, music pulses through thin walls, and secrets, if you listen closely, begin to hum under everything. That night, the city sounded ordinary, Cicadas. Car doors. A neighbor hosing down the driveway. Nothing in the air warned anyone about the violence that would soon stain a backyard and ripple across the internet. And yet, if you knew where to look, if you knew which eyes to watch, which words to replay, you might have sensed a crack widening, the kind that starts in silence and ends in blood. This story begins long before the pool, long before the tripod, and the red live icon. It begins with three young men who believed their history made them unbreakable. Marcus Reed, 27, lived with his mother in a modest two-story on the west side, a house whose paint had faded in the sun, whose porch light always worked, whose kitchen smelled of coffee and laundry soap. To neighbors, Marcus was polite, the kind who carried groceries, who kept his head down. To his friends he was loyal, someone you could call at 2 a.m., someone who'd show up and say very little but do exactly what you needed. Eric Miller, 28, was the spark. He liked the camera, liked the crowd, liked the way a small moment could be turned into a story if you framed it right. He worked hard at the auto shop, but his real talent was people, making them laugh, making them watch, making them feel like they were part of something fun. When Eric pulled out his phone, the world became a stage. He wasn't cruel. He just understood attention, and sometimes, attention demanded a punchline. David Johnson, 26, was the balanced, steady, generous, the friend who could diffuse a tense room with a shrug and a grin. He hung between Marcus's quiet intensity and Eric's showman energy, the way a bridge hangs between two shores. If there was ever a referee among them, it was David. He loved them both, and that love had held for years. But even the strongest bridge can creak when the river swells. For Marcus, the river had a name: Linda. His mother had raised him alone after his father left no child support, no Sunday visits. Just a boy and a woman who refused to let him drown. She worked long shifts at the grocery store, came home with sore feet and soft eyes, and never once let the light in that house flicker. To Marcus, she wasn't simply a parent. She was proof that love could be steel, proof that sacrifice could be holy. And in a group where jokes flew like bottle rockets, Linda was the one subject that was sacred. If you've ever sat with a man like Marcus, you've seen it the way teasing about rent or jobs lands, how it sits in the jaw and tightens the shoulders. For years he learned to laugh along. Yeah, man, still at the house. Yup, my mom can cook better than yours. Little deflections that kept peace without admitting pain. The jokes weren't constant, and they weren't always mean, but repetition carves grooves. And in quiet rooms, shame echoes. In the spring of 2022, money got tighter. Marcus picked up temp shifts and lost them just as quickly. He dated a little. Nothing stuck. Every time something slipped through his fingers, he told himself to hold tighter to what he still had. His mother, his friends, the rituals, Friday beers, pickup games, birthdays that ended with takeout cartons and tired laughter. The kind of life you can carry without thinking until the carrying wears you out. Eric had started streaming more short lives, 20 minutes here and there, just enough to keep people watching. He didn't mean harm. He meant momentum. The internet was a current, and he was learning how to ride it. A joke that landed in the yard landed bigger online. A face that blushed in front of 10 friends became content for hundreds. The world had become a room with too many doors, and when you laughed in that room, you never knew who was listening. The first time Eric dropped a line about Marcus still living at home on a stream, the comments lit like fireworks. Not hateful, just quick. Bro's a mama's boy for. Ain't no shame in saving $. Emojis that laughed and cried at the same time. Marcus forced a smile and raised his beer toward the camera. That half-second gesture men learn when feeling small. If you toast the joke, maybe it won't cut you. Later that night, alone, he scrolled through those comments in the dark and told himself it was nothing. It had to be nothing. There are only so many places a man can put his pride. By July, the plan for a pool party felt simple, necessary, like a pressure valve. The invitation was casual. Someone had a backyard big enough. Someone else had speakers. Everyone could bring a little something. David sent a message that read like a guarantee. We need this. In summer, Detroit can feel like it's forgiving you. Heat that slows the blood. Sunsets that make everything look softer. You forget, for a few hours, the things you're tired of remembering. But a party doesn't erase a pattern, and a camera doesn't know when to look away. True crime stories often hinge on a moment, the sound of a door, the flash of metal, the way someone says a name. But they rarely begin there. They begin with the smaller moments we're tempted to ignore. A face that goes still during a laugh. A hand that tightens around a bottle. A comment that lands heavier than it should. The signs were there. A careful viewer can rewind and point to them, frame by frame. At the time, everyone keeps dancing. The night before the party, Marcus sat at the kitchen table while Linda folded laundry. The television murmured low. The house smelled like detergent and rain. You going out tomorrow? She asked without looking up. He said yes. She smiled. Take some pictures, she said, that little motherly wish to be included without intruding. Marcus nodded and said he would. He didn't mention the streams. He didn't mention the comments. He didn't mention the feeling that the ground under him had begun to move. If you're listening now, if you've made it this far, you already know where this is going. You know the pool, the tripod, the red dot blinking in the corner of the screen. You know the laugh that goes too far, and the man whose face hardens when his mother's name becomes a punchline. You know the knife. You know the sirens. But before all of that, there were boys who became men together. Men who believed loyalty could carry them over any break, and a son who had built his whole identity on protecting the one person who had always protected him. Sometimes a story doesn't warn you. Sometimes it does, and you're too close to hear it. When Eric pressed go live the next evening, he didn't think he was opening a door he couldn't close. He thought he was inviting people in, the way he always did, into a circle of music and water and jokes that have traveled the same path so many times they feel harmless. David tossed a ball, someone cracked a beer, someone jumped in the pool. The camera watched from its cheap tripod, silent, patient, honest, in a way human beings rarely are. And Marcus? He sat at the edge with that practiced half-smile, watching the surface of the water tremble. In it, a reflection broke and mended. Broke and mended. As if the face looking back at him didn't quite belong to the man everyone thought they knew. If this were a different kind of story, we'd end the night with fireworks and tired hugs. But this is not that story. This is the one where a line gets crossed in front of an audience, where pride hardens into fury, and fury looks for a tool, where friendship can't hold against the weight of a single sacred name said wrong, at the wrong time, in the wrong light. After tonight, people will replay the video, and ask the same questions that haunt every crime like this. Was there a second when it could have stopped? A word someone could have swallowed? A joke someone could have left unsaid? They'll pause frames and circle faces and count the beats between laughter and violence. They'll try to locate the hinge as if understanding it could undo what happened next. But in real time, no one paused. The music kept playing. The comments kept coming. And the red light on the phone kept telling the truth. The whole world was watching, even if no one yet understood what they were about to see. Tell me, when a man has built his life on defending the only person who never left him, what happens when he feels he's failed her in public? What does loyalty become when it's humiliated under a spotlight? And what do we owe each other, in rooms both real and digital, when laughter turns into a blade? The answers are coming. You might not like them. For years, Marcus Reed had lived in the shadows of his louder, more charismatic friends. Eric Johnson and David Carter were the life of every party, quick with jokes, charming in conversation, and magnetic to those around them. Marcus, by contrast, was quieter, reserved, always on the edges of the group. He was the kind of man who spoke little but observed much, who carried a loyalty that seemed unshakable, even when it cost him his dignity. The three had grown up in the same Detroit neighborhood. Their bond was forged in adolescence, backyard basketball games, nights spent playing video games until dawn, and weekends roaming the city streets. To outsiders, they seemed inseparable, brothers by choice rather than by blood. Yet beneath the surface, fractures had long been forming. Eric and David, with their bold personalities, often turned Marcus into the punchline of their jokes. Sometimes it was playful, the kind of ribbing that friends endure. But other times, it cut deeper. They mocked his clothes, his silence, his lack of ambition. The cruelest jabs were always about his mother, a woman Marcus revered. To him, she was everything, his rock, his reason to keep going. When the others disrespected her, it wasn't just teasing. It was a blade twisting in his chest. Still, Marcus stayed. Loyalty, or perhaps dependency, kept him tethered to the friendship. He told himself that deep down, they cared for him, that the mockery was just a mask for affection. But the truth was more complicated. Marcus was the quiet one, the dependable one, the man who would never push back no matter how far the jokes went. And in that imbalance, resentment grew like a shadow. By the time the summer of 2023 arrived, their friendship had become strained. Eric and David's popularity only magnified the distance. They were throwing parties, streaming live on social media, gaining attention and followers, while Marcus watched from the sidelines. He joined the gatherings, yes, but more and more, he felt like an outsider at his own table. And then came the pool party. It was supposed to be a night of laughter, music, and summer fun. A backyard filled with drinks, splashing water, and the warm glow of string lights. Guests gathered around the pool, phones in hand, recording snippets of the night for Instagram and TikTok. The air smelled of barbecue and chlorine, of beer and sweat. Music thumped from speakers. Laughter echoed off the fence. And for a brief moment, it seemed like nothing could disturb the joy. But even in that celebration, the cracks in the friendship showed. Eric, his phone streaming live to hundreds of viewers, couldn't resist poking fun at Marcus once again. The comments rolled in from strangers watching, laughing, encouraging the humiliation. David joined in, his words sharp, his laughter louder than the music. And then, the insult Marcus could not bear, the one about his mother, was thrown like a grenade into the night. At first, Marcus tried to swallow it, as he always had. He forced a tight smile, turned his gaze away, let the laughter of others drown his anger. But inside, something snapped. The years of mockery, the feeling of being small, the loyalty that had never been returned. All of it collided. In that instant, the betrayal was complete. He looked at his friends and no longer saw brothers. He saw enemies. He saw the embodiment of every wound they had inflicted, every cut disguised as a joke. And while the others laughed, unaware of the storm building inside him, Marcus felt something darker take root. A silence, a focus, a rage. From the outside, no one noticed. The party went on, drinks poured, music blared. But within Marcus, the decision had already been made. What began as a friendship, what had once been the closest bond of his life, was about to turn into something else entirely. Something deadly. The pool water rippled under the soft glow of string lights, their reflections dancing in the chlorinated blue. The night was heavy with humidity, thick with the smell of grilled meat, cigarette smoke, and spilled beer. From the outside, it looked like any summer gathering in Detroit, a mix of laughter, shouts, and music pounding against the neighborhood's quiet. Phones were everywhere, their cameras capturing every splash, every toast, every joke that flew across the air like darts. Marcus sat at the edge of it all, silent, nursing a drink that had long since lost its fizz. His eyes scanned the crowd not with joy, not with camaraderie, but with a cold detachment. The voices of Eric and David rose above the others, amplified not just by alcohol but by the confidence of being the center of attention. They were streaming live, as always, their faces glowing in the light of a phone screen, their comments filling with laughing emojis and taunts from strangers who had no idea the knife they were twisting. To Marcus, the moment played like a slow burn. Every laugh directed at him, every smirk from his so-called friends, piled on top of years of humiliation. The music couldn't drown it out, the chatter around him couldn't distract him. He heard only one thing, the way they spoke about his mother, reducing the woman he cherished into a punchline for their entertainment. His breathing changed, slow and measured. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with something colder, more focused. He rose from his seat, unnoticed at first, blending into the chaos of the party. He slipped into the house, the noise fading behind him, swallowed by the dimly lit interior. Inside, it was quieter. The thump of the bass was muffled by walls, replaced by the distant echo of laughter spilling in through open windows. The air smelled faintly of bleach and old wood, a stark contrast to the party outside. Marcus moved with purpose, his mind no longer debating, no longer questioning. Every step was heavy, deliberate. In the kitchen drawer, his hand found what he was looking for. Cold steel. A knife, sharp enough to cut through meat and bone, gleaming faintly in the half-light. He held it, and felt a grim resolve wash over him. He wasn't thinking of escape. He wasn't thinking of consequences. He was thinking only of the betrayal, of the years of silence he had endured, of the moment his mother's name became fodder for strangers watching through a phone screen. When Marcus stepped back outside, the night seemed louder, brighter, almost mocking. Eric and David were still performing for their invisible audience, their laughter high-pitched, their drinks sloshing. They didn't see the storm in his eyes. They didn't notice the blade glinting at his side. The first strike came fast, too fast for Eric to react. The live stream caught the shift, the blur of movement, the sudden gasp, the camera shaking as someone dropped their phone. Viewers thought it was a prank at first, another wild stunt for entertainment. But then came the scream, raw and unfiltered, slicing through the music. David stumbled backward, his laughter gone, his face twisting in horror. Marcus turned on him next, the knife rising and falling in a frenzy that had been years in the making. The crowd erupted in panic shouts, crashes, bodies scrambling for safety. Someone yelled to cut the stream. Someone else dialed 911, but the chaos was too thick, too immediate. Blood spilled onto the deck, dark and glistening under the lights. The once playful party became a nightmare, a stage for violence that no one could comprehend. Guests screamed, some froze, others fled into the night. And all the while, Marcus kept moving, his face expressionless, his body carrying out what his mind had already decided long before. For a brief moment, the world seemed to stop. The music cut off. The laughter vanished. Only the sound of ragged breathing and sobs remained. Eric lay still, David groaned, and Marcus stood over them, chest heaving, knife dripping. He looked around at the faces of the crowd, their phones still clutched in trembling hands, their eyes wide with shock and terror. He wasn't afraid of them. He wasn't ashamed. He was calm, almost too calm. And then, without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving behind a scene that would haunt every witness for the rest of their lives. The pool water still rippled, but now it reflected more than lights. It reflected the blood that stained the night forever. The backyard was a battlefield of chaos. Screams echoed into the night as bodies pushed and stumbled over one another, a desperate attempt to escape what they had just witnessed. The music had stopped, but the sound of panic was louder than any song. Some people dropped their phones, others clung to them, streaming and recording in disbelief. What had begun as a summer pool party was now being broadcast to hundreds, soon thousands of horrified strangers across the internet. Eric lay motionless near the deck, his chest slick with blood, his eyes glassy. David writhed on the ground, clutching his side, his breaths sharp and shallow. The once rowdy crowd stood frozen for a beat, then scattered like a flock of startled birds. The smell of chlorine, mixed with the metallic tang of blood, saturating the humid Detroit air. Marcus walked with eerie calm, the knife still in his hand. He didn't run. He didn't panic. His face was unreadable, his steps slow and deliberate, as if the chaos unfolding around him belonged to someone else entirely. One witness later told investigators, "It was like he wasn't even in the same world as us. Everyone else was screaming, crying, running. But him? He was calm. Too calm." Calls to 911 poured in. Dispatchers struggled to make sense of overlapping voices, the hysteria of partygoers shouting about stabbings, live streams, and blood everywhere. Sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the night like a warning. David's screams weakened, replaced by faint groans, and then silence. Guests who had once laughed at his jokes were now pressing towels and shirts against his wounds, their hands slick with blood, their own bodies shaking with adrenaline. Some prayed under their breath, others cursed Marcus's name. Inside the house, someone finally managed to shut off the live stream. But by then, it was too late. The footage had already been captured, screenshotted, shared, and saved by strangers across social media. What was meant to humiliate Marcus had transformed into evidence of a brutal double homicide. Police cars skidded to a stop out front, red and blue lights flashing against the neighborhood's quiet houses. Officers rushed in, guns drawn, shouting commands over the din of screams. They found Eric already gone, David unresponsive, and Marcus walking calmly down the street, his clothes stained, his knife loosely dangling in his hand. When ordered to drop the weapon, Marcus didn't resist. He set the knife on the ground, raised his hands, and looked directly at the officers. Witnesses later recalled his expression. It wasn't fear, it wasn't regret. It was emptiness. Neighbors peered through blinds and doorways, drawn out by the flashing lights and shouting. Some filmed from a distance, others whispered prayers. Children were pulled inside by frantic parents, shielded from the sight of blood pooling near the backyard deck. By the time the paramedics arrived, the yard was silent except for the occasional sob and the crackle of police radios. The bodies were covered. The laughter that had once filled the space was gone forever. News traveled fast. Within hours, local outlets picked up the story of a Detroit man stabbing two friends during a live stream. By morning, it had spread across the country. Headlines filled with words like shocking, gruesome, and unthinkable. Clips of the video circulated despite desperate attempts to remove them. The internet, once a stage for Eric and David's jokes, had now become the courtroom of public opinion. For Marcus's mother, the news was unbearable. Her name, the one mocked in that live stream, was now tangled in the tragedy. Reporters camped outside her home, cameras flashing, neighbors whispering. Some pitied her, others blamed her, cruelly suggesting that her son's act of violence was a reflection of her. Detectives worked through the night, interviewing witnesses whose stories overlapped in fragments of fear and shock. Some admitted they thought Marcus was joking until they saw the blood. Others confessed they had seen the tension building for years, how Marcus always sat in silence while Eric and David ridiculed him. One friend whispered, "We should have seen it coming." Friend. At the precinct, Marcus sat in a cold interrogation room, his hands cuffed to the table. He didn't demand a lawyer right away. He didn't shout, didn't cry. He spoke only when spoken to, his answers short, almost detached. When asked why, his reply was chilling in its simplicity. "They disrespected my mother." The detectives pressed for more, but Marcus said little else. It wasn't rage that fueled him anymore, it was resolve. Outside, the community tried to make sense of the horror. Vigils were held for Eric and David, candles flickering in the Detroit night, posters covered with photos of the two young men smiling, their lives frozen in snapshots of happier days. But even in grief, the controversy simmered. Some people condemned Marcus outright, calling him a monster. Others whispered about years of bullying, humiliation, and betrayal. The line between victim and aggressor blurred in conversations, though the law was clear. Marcus had taken 2 lives. The pool deck, once a symbol of summer joy, was now stained with memory. Neighbors avoided walking past the house, as if the shadows of that night still lingered. And for those who had been there, the screams replayed every time they closed their eyes. Marcus's arrest didn't end the story. It only began the next chapter, a trial that would force the world to look closely at what happens when humiliation, rage, and betrayal collide in the most public of ways. The courthouse in downtown Detroit became the stage for a drama that drew in not only the local community, but also the nation. By the time Marcus's case reached trial, months had passed since that summer night. Yet the shockwaves had not settled. The video footage had already made its rounds across the internet, dissected frame by strangers who turned themselves into armchair detectives, commentators, and critics. On the first day of trial, the courtroom was packed. Journalists filled every seat, their pens poised, cameras waiting outside. Family members of Eric and David wore black, clutching tissues, some with framed photos of the young men whose lives had ended so abruptly. Across the aisle sat Marcus, dressed in a plain suit provided by his defense attorney, his hands folded neatly on the table. He looked thinner, quieter, his eyes fixed forward, never once scanning the crowd. The prosecution painted a picture of cold-blooded murder. They replayed the video for the jury, though heavily edited, showing the moments leading up to the stabbing. The sound of laughter, the insults directed at Marcus's mother, and then the sudden shift. Screams, blood, and chaos. Jurors turned away, some covering their mouths, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The prosecutor's voice rang with conviction. Ladies and gentlemen, this was not an accident. This was not self-defense. This was a deliberate act. 2 young men are dead because Marcus Johnson decided his pride outweighed their lives. The defense took a different approach. They did not deny Marcus's actions. Instead, they argued the years of ridicule, bullying, and humiliation had driven him to a breaking point. Witnesses testified about the constant teasing, the cruel jokes, the live streams that mocked him. They described Marcus as a man who rarely fought back, who swallowed his anger until it boiled over on that fateful night. One friend, voice trembling, admitted on the stand, "We all laughed. We thought it was harmless. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe we pushed him too far." The courtroom shifted with every word. Some jurors leaned forward, their brows furrowed in sympathy. Others sat rigid, unmoved, their gazes fixed on the grieving families of Eric and David. Marcus's mother was called to testify. Her voice cracked as she spoke of her son, a quiet boy who grew up carrying burdens silently. She described how the insults about her had cut deeper than anyone realized. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "He wasn't protecting me. He was carrying my shame. And it destroyed him." But the prosecution was relentless. They reminded the jury of the knife Marcus brought to the party, the calculated nature of his actions. This was not the heat of the moment. This was a choice, a deadly choice. The trial stretched on for weeks, the tension never easing. Every day, the families of Eric and David sat in the front row, their grief raw and visible. Every day Marcus sat expressionless, his hands folded, his voice quiet. He never testified, leaving his attorney to speak for him. Outside the courthouse, the public was divided. Some demanded the maximum penalty, calling Marcus a murderer with no excuse. Others whispered about the darker side of humiliation and bullying, asking if society itself had played a role in pushing him to violence. Talk shows debated it. Social media ignited with arguments. Hashtags carried the names of the dead, while others carried Marcus's. When the time for closing arguments arrived, the courtroom was silent. The prosecution stood firm. You cannot excuse murder. Whatever words were said, whatever jokes were made, nothing justifies stabbing 2 unarmed men to death. Justice for Eric and David demands a verdict of guilty. The defense countered with a plea for understanding, if not forgiveness. This is not a monster. This is a man who broke under years of ridicule. He should be held accountable, yes, but not condemned without context. He deserves mercy. The jury deliberated for hours that stretched into a full day. The city held its breath. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, broadcasting live updates every half hour. Families wept in the hallways, clutching each other's hands. Finally, the jury returned. The foreperson stood, holding the slip of paper that would decide Marcus's fate. The courtroom went silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioner. We, the jury, find the defendant, Marcus Johnson. The pause was excruciating. Guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder. Gasps filled the room. Some cried out in relief, others in despair. Eric and David's families clung to one another, tears streaming down their faces. Marcus's mother collapsed into her chair, her sobs muffled against her hands. Marcus himself did not flinch. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, staring straight ahead. For him, the verdict was not unexpected. Perhaps it was even a kind of release. The judge later sentenced him to 2 consecutive life terms in prison, with the possibility of parole after 40 years. The gavel struck, and with it, Marcus's life outside those walls was over. Reporters rushed to capture reactions. Some headlines praised the verdict as justice served. Others questioned whether justice had truly been achieved, or whether the tragedy was simply compounded by another life destroyed. But for the families of Eric and David, nothing could bring their sons back. The candles, the vigils, the framed photos, they were all reminders of futures cut short. For Marcus's mother, the sentence meant visiting her son behind glass for the rest of her life. The trial ended, but the questions lingered. What if someone had intervened sooner? What if the laughter had stopped before it became cruelty? What if Marcus had asked for help instead of reaching for a knife? In the end, the courtroom provided a verdict, but not closure. When the trial ended and the courtroom lights dimmed, the story of Marcus Johnson, Eric, and David did not fade away. Instead, it echoed through Detroit and beyond, weaving its way into conversations about violence, pride, and the invisible wounds left by humiliation. The city was left not only with the memories of 2 young men gone too soon, but also with the haunting image of another man who had thrown his future away in a moment of rage. For the families of Eric and David, grief became a daily companion. Their homes, once filled with laughter and noise, now felt hollow. Eric's mother kept his bedroom exactly as he had left it. The basketball trophies still lined up neatly on the dresser. David's father replayed old voicemails just to hear his son's voice again. They both spoke at community events, their words trembling with pain, pleading with others to remember their sons, not as victims in a headline, but as real, vibrant young men whose dreams had been stolen. Meanwhile, Marcus began serving his sentence in a state prison far from Detroit. Behind the steel doors and concrete walls, he became just another inmate, stripped of his identity beyond a number. To fellow prisoners, he was not Marcus, the man who had once been mocked at parties. He was not Marcus, the son who carried his mother's shame. He was simply a man serving life, yet within those walls, the weight of what he had done clung to him. Letters from his mother arrived often, her handwriting shaky, her words filled with a mixture of sorrow and love. She never stopped calling him my boy, even though the world now saw him as a murderer. Outside prison walls, the case continued to stir debate. Talk shows dissected the events over and over. Was Marcus a cold-blooded killer, or was he a broken man pushed past his limits? Schools held assemblies about bullying, using his story as a cautionary tale. Some teachers read aloud from news reports, warning students about the ripple effects of humiliation. Parents whispered to each other at basketball games, wondering how far their own children might go if pushed too far. Social media, relentless as ever, refused to let the story die. Hashtags carried the names of Eric and David, reminding the world of the lives that had been lost. Others circulated Marcus's name, some condemning him, others calling for compassion. Videos resurfaced clips of the fateful live stream, grainy but unforgettable. Each time the footage appeared, it reopened old wounds for the families, forcing them to relive their darkest night. But amid the anger and the mourning, some sought meaning. Community leaders organized forums, inviting psychologists, teachers, and youth mentors to discuss the dangers of unchecked humiliation and toxic masculinity. They spoke of how young men were often taught to hide their pain, to bury their shame, until it erupted in violence. Marcus's case became a symbol, not just of tragedy, but of warning. Yet for all the conversations, the streets of Detroit still felt the same. Parties continued. Live streams carried on. Jokes at someone else's expense echoed in basements and backyards. The lesson was there, but whether it was heard that remained uncertain. Years later, the case still haunted those who had been there. Friends who once laughed at Marcus's expense admitted privately that the guilt never left them. They replayed the moment in their minds, wishing they had stopped, wishing they had stepped in before the knife was drawn. Their laughter, once careless, had become a curse they could not escape. Marcus, now older and grayer, marked time in prison. Every birthday was a reminder of the life he had lost. Every parole hearing a reminder of the lives he had taken. He was haunted, too, not by the verdict, but by the faces of Eric and David, boys he once called friends. In the end, the story of Marcus Johnson was not just about murder. It was about pride, shame, and the silent wars people fight within themselves. It was about the dangerous intersection of humiliation and masculinity, where words cut as deep as knives, and laughter can be more deadly than silence. True crime stories often search for lessons, neat endings, or justice neatly tied with a bow. But this story resisted that. Justice had been served in a legal sense. 2 families received a verdict. The killer was sentenced, the law carried out its duty. Yet no one walked away whole. No sentence could erase the pain of parents who buried their sons. No courtroom decision could restore Marcus's life outside prison walls. And so, the case lived on not in law books, but in whispers, in warnings, in the uneasy silence that follows cruel laughter. For those who remembered that summer night, the pool party would never be just another gathering. It would forever be the place where laughter turned to screams, where pride turned to blood, and where 3 lives, 2 lost, 1 destroyed, were bound together in tragedy. In the end, Detroit carried the story like a scar, visible, permanent. A reminder that sometimes the deadliest weapons are not knives or guns, but words.
Yeah, guy, black shirt running. Hey, drop it. Drop that shit. Drop it. Drop the fucking gun. Drop the fucking gun. Drop the fucking gun. Drop it. Drop it. Drop it. Drop it. Drop it. Hey, so let me have shot fired. Shot fired. Drop the fucking gun. Drop it. Drop it. Drop it. Drop it. Don't fucking touch it. Don't fucking touch it. Don't fucking touch it. Turn around. Turn the fuck around. Turn the fuck around.
Atlanta, Georgia, a city famous for its vibrant music scene, brightly lit buildings, and liberal atmosphere. But hidden beneath that glamour There are always dark corners that not everyone dares to look directly into. In 2017, a shocking case occurred here. A bloody, cold, and mysterious death that shook the entire community. The victim was a young, strong woman who always had a bright smile on her lips. She had a kind heart, a dream of a peaceful life, and a belief that everyone deserves to be loved. However, fate gave her a cruel ending. One fateful summer night, gunshots rang out, ending it all. It was not just an ordinary murder. Her death has sparked a series of painful questions. Why are cases targeting transgender people, especially women of color, often forgotten? Why does justice always come late, or never come at all? And why, in the 21st century, are people still being killed for daring to be themselves? In this documentary series, we will follow the story of 6 parts. From that fateful night in College Park, to the dead-end investigations, the loving memories of friends and family, to the community's tireless efforts to seek justice. Each part is a piece of the puzzle, and when put together, we will see the whole picture, at once painful and violent, but also filled with a glimmer of hope. The question remains: who killed Titi Dangerfield? The answer may be buried in the darkness forever. But one thing is certain: her story will never be forgotten. Titi Dangerfield was born in 1985 in Atlanta, Georgia. To her friends and colleagues, she was a bright light. Although only slightly above average in height, Titi had a radiant smile that lit up the room. At the bars where she worked as a bartender, regulars remembered Titi not only for her skillful mixing of drinks but also for the warmth in each story she shared. People came to drink, but left feeling heard. But to be true to herself, Titi paid a price. As a transgender woman of color, she faced prejudice, suspicious looks, and even hatred from society. Friends said that sometimes, at night, Titi received strange calls, vague voices, strange messages full of hidden meanings. She once confided that she felt insecure, but still believed in the kindness of people. Titi thought that if she kept smiling and being nice, no one would want to hurt her. On the night of the 30th of July, 2017, Titi and a few friends went to the 50-Yard Line bar, a popular bar in College Park. She wore a simple black dress, light makeup, and a familiar smile. Security cameras recorded her leaving the bar at around 3 a.m. In that short video, Titi looked completely normal, not worried or afraid. She drove home, and no one knew that those would be the last moments anyone would see her safe. About an hour later, in the parking lot of Southampton Estates, several residents heard strange sounds. A few dry noises echoed in the night, but no one thought it was gunshots. When they stepped outside, they saw a scene that silenced the entire neighborhood. Titi Dangerfield, lying next to his car, shot multiple times. College Park police quickly cordoned off the scene. What puzzled them was the detail. All of Titi's belongings were intact. Her phone, purse, keys, even her wallet. Nothing had been taken. This wasn't a robbery. It had the look of an execution. In the days that followed, grief turned to outrage. Atlanta's LGBTQ+ community held vigils and called for justice. Titi was not just a woman, she was a symbol of the courage to live her truth. Her death was thus not just a personal tragedy, but also a reflection of a wave of violence against transgender people of color in the United States. In 2017, Titi became the 16th victim in a string of similar murders, a number that would make anyone shudder. But for the police, this case was not simply a hate crime. Investigators found that in Titi's life, in addition to the light, there were also dark corners. Some close friends said she had complained about unsafe relationships, men appearing and disappearing inexplicably, the midnight calls, the strange messages, all made people suspect that Titi had accidentally gotten into some kind of danger. So, in the end, was Titi Dangerfield killed because of who she was, or because of who she knew? That is the question that has haunted her for many years, as the killer is still out there. If you find these details worth pondering, subscribe to the channel, because behind Titi Dangerfield's death, there are many truths that have never been revealed, truths that can make you speechless. In the red and blue flashes of patrol cars, the Southampton Estates parking lot was a cold maze. Police cordoned off Titi Dangerfield's car, while paramedics silently covered her body. Georgia summer nights are usually hot, but that night the air was chilly. Every detail was frozen in the memories of those present. The ambulance sirens, the flashing lights over the pool of blood, the deathly silence that hung over the neighborhood. Investigators noted something peculiar. Titi's belongings were still intact. There were no signs of a robbery, no rummaged bags, and even her car was locked. The scene raised a terrifying theory: the killer was not after property, but after life. This was no accident, nor was it a spontaneous quarrel. This was a targeted murder. Nearby residents reported hearing some strange noises around 4:30 a.m. Some thought it was fireworks, others thought someone was arguing. No one dared to go outside until the police lights flashed. Those scattered statements yielded no concrete clues. The killer seemed to have disappeared into the darkness, leaving no trace. The police began searching the surrounding area, checking security cameras. A video showed Titi leaving the bar at 3 a.m. She drove toward her apartment, her face relaxed, showing no signs of anything unusual. The gap between that moment and when her body was found was the most mysterious. Where did Titi stop? Who did she meet? Or was someone following her from the bar? In the days that followed, news of Titi's death spread throughout Atlanta. The LGBTQ+ community was shocked. They knew the price of being true to themselves, but no one expected such a cruel ending. Titi became the 16th victim of a series of transgender murders in the U.S. that year. The number made many people shudder, as a warning that these lives are still being hunted out there. Friends and relatives described Titi as a person who always radiated positive energy. She was not only a good bartender, but also a good listener and a comforter. One friend said through tears, "She was the one who made me believe that everything would be okay. But now she's gone in the most painful way." The media began to question, was this a hate crime? Or was there something else behind it? Because although Titi lived a strong life, vague messages, shadows appearing and disappearing quickly in her life. Titi admitted to being worried, but she believed that kindness could diffuse any resentment. That belief sometimes made her the most vulnerable target. Detectives began to narrow down Titi's relationships. They went to bars, talked to staff, asked friends. Some witnesses recalled seeing her chatting with a few strange faces, but no one remembered their characteristics. The fragments of memories were like ghosts, not enough to form a complete picture. In parallel with the investigation, the community refused to stay silent. Many vigils and memorials were held. Hundreds of candles were lit in Titi's memory. Voices echoed, "We will not let her death be forgotten." Human rights organizations emphasized that Titi was not just an individual victim, but a symbol of an entire community under threat. But the deeper the investigation went, the more disturbing the truth became. There was no physical evidence at the scene. No strange fingerprints, no DNA, no murder weapon. The scene seemed staged to erase all traces. This made the case even more difficult. However, some of Titi's friends mentioned a notable detail: the strange calls she received. Who was behind those calls? Was it someone she knew? Or was it a stranger who had haunted Titi for months? That question became an important line of investigation. But tracing the strange phone number through the mass of data was not easy. In the meantime, the press continued to delve into the social perspective. They wrote about the fragility of transgender women of color, about how they were often the targets of violence. Titi Dangerfield became an icon, but also a painful reminder that being true to yourself can sometimes cost you your life. The police aren't ruling out personal motives. Perhaps someone in Titi's complicated relationships crossed a line. A jealous lover, someone she rejected, or even a dangerous relationship that her friends didn't know about. But to prove any theory, they needed more than an emotional story. They needed evidence, and that's exactly what they didn't have. As the case stalled, the community began to worry. If the killer wasn't caught, who else would be targeted next? Who was lurking in the shadows, ready to target another life out of prejudice or hatred? That question made the case not just a personal pain for Titi's family, but also a haunting one for the entire community. And as the police began to name the first suspects, a wave of controversy arose, because all the evidence was weak and not convincing enough. But before we get there, we need to stop at an important detail: the short time between when Titi left the bar and when she collapsed in the parking lot. In that less than 90 minutes, what really happened? Who did she meet? Where did she stop? Or was someone patiently watching, waiting for the right moment to strike? If you want to know, keep going, because what happened in that short time could be the key to unlocking the entire mystery behind Titi Dangerfield's death. Every murder case has a lull. It's the time after the candles burn out, after the media moves on to a new headline, and after the community begins to return to the grind of daily life. But for the police and Titi Dangerfield's loved ones, that lull is the most nerve-wracking. Because the killer is still out there, no one knows who he is, and no one is sure if he'll stop. In the days after Titi's death, investigators focused on a seemingly small detail: the strange calls and texts she had received. Police obtained a warrant to retrieve her phone's call history. They found several unsaved numbers, often late at night. Some of the messages were sexually explicit, others were vaguely threatening. Notably, Titi had deleted some of the messages, perhaps because she didn't want to worry her friends or family. But those gaps raised suspicions. Was she hiding some dangerous relationship? During the search, the police discovered a prominent name: a young man who had called Titi several times just days before the murder. He lived not far from the scene, had a history of assault and gun-related crimes. Investigators began to wonder, was this a secret relationship, or was it an obsessive person who was stalking Titi to the end? In August, the police began to question him. The man appeared calm, denying any involvement in Titi's death. He said he knew her through friends, but insisted that he had been with his family the night of the murder and had an alibi. Detectives checked his statements, and indeed his family confirmed it. But in murder cases, an alibi is sometimes just a thin shell. But the harsh truth was, aside from the fact that he had called Titi, the police found no physical evidence tying him to the scene. No DNA, no weapon, no witnesses who saw him near the parking lot. The feeling of helplessness set in again. They had a suspect, but no strong enough legal basis to charge him. As the investigation dragged on, public opinion began to rise. Atlanta's LGBTQ+ community was outraged by the slow pace of the police. They argued that if the victim had been a white, cisgender woman, the case might have been solved more quickly. Many articles highlighted the slowness in protecting trans women of color, seeing Titi's death as part of a pattern of systemic violence. A group of activists staged a protest in front of police headquarters. They held up signs that read, "Justice for Titi. Justice for Titi." A simple slogan that contained both anger and despair. Amid mounting public pressure, the police had to provide answers. A detective stood before the television camera, his voice low but cautious. "We are pursuing many lines of investigation. This is not an easy case. But we are committed to bringing the perpetrator to justice." The promise echoed. But in the hearts of many, it remained an empty promise. At the same time, Titi's family was dealing with a double whammy: the pain of losing a loved one, and the pain of seeing the case seemingly stall. "Every day I wake up thinking about my sister," her sister said in an interview. "I want to know who did this. I want to look that person in the eye and ask, why?" Despite finding no physical evidence, the police continued to expand their investigation. They checked traffic cameras along the route from the bar to the apartment complex. A grainy video showed another car driving in the same direction as Titi's at the same time. The license plate was not clearly visible, but it was an important detail. Was Titi being followed? The investigation team decided to narrow down the list of cars of the same type registered in the area. They ran down a few names, including the man who had been questioned, but again, nothing was convincing enough to connect him to the crime scene. As police navigated the maze of flimsy evidence, the community continued to remember Titi. A graffiti wall in Atlanta read, "Her light still shines. Her light still shines." The image became a place for people to leave flowers, to talk to Titi as if she were still around. "There are some murders that leave us feeling trapped," the lead investigator on the case admitted. "This is one of them. All the leads are fuzzy, and the killer seems to disappear like a ghost." Meanwhile, another theory began to be mentioned. Was Titi not only the victim of a transphobic hate group, but also involved in a much more dangerous relationship, perhaps involving gangs or illegal activity? Some tabloids even made headlines that Titi lived a double life, working as a bartender and possibly getting involved with dangerous people. Family and friends immediately denied her innocence, but the rumors spread quickly, tarnishing Titi's image in the eyes of some people. This further angered the LGBTQ+ community, who believed that society was always ready to blame the victim instead of focusing on finding the perpetrator. Public opinion was divided. One side called for justice for Titi, the other suspected her of being involved in shady relationships. Meanwhile, the police were still unable to officially announce a suspect. The case was gradually labeled unsolved, but behind the scenes, some detectives refused to give up. They believed that important clues were still somewhere, maybe on Titi's phone, in grainy body camera footage, or in the testimony of a witness who had not dared to speak up. The problem was, as time passed, memories faded, and the chances of finding justice for Titi became slimmer. By fall, the case had dragged on for more than 2 months without any significant progress. Atlantans were talking less about it, and the media rarely reported on it. But for those who loved Titi, the pain was still raw. They knew that if the case was forgotten, the killer would forever be at large. And the question still echoed through the night. Who killed Titi Dangerfield? It's a bitter truth in the world of crime. Not all cases get solved. Backlogs pile up in archives. Victim photos are placed in binders. And the words, unsolved, become a dreaded ellipsis. Titi Dangerfield's case, sadly, is sliding toward that. After months of investigation, the police have yet to find a breakthrough. No weapon, no witnesses, no DNA. The suspect car is too blurry to track down in the body camera footage. There are potential suspects, but not enough evidence to charge them. And so, from what was initially a hot murder case, Titi becomes one of many victims in an endless list of unsolved deaths. Her family lives with the pain of not only loss, but also of abandonment. Every day, they wait for a call from the police, hoping to hear, "We found the killer." But the phone rang for the usual reasons. As the months passed, hope faded, leaving a void that could not be filled. Titi's mother, at a small memorial service, wept. "She was my flesh and blood. I can't sleep well, knowing that the person who killed her is still out there." Her voice trembled, as if each word drained the life out of her. For Titi's friends, the loss was no less devastating. They still gathered at the bar where Titi used to work, reminiscing about her smile and humor. But in each story, there was a common haunting. She should still be here. Some friends confessed that, since the case, they have become wary of going out at night. They feel they could be the next Titi. In Atlanta's LGBTQ+ community, Titi Dangerfield's death became a grim reminder of the fragility of life for trans women of color. That year, the United States recorded many similar murders, most of which remained unsolved. People began to see Titi not just as a victim, but as a symbol. Marches continued. People wore Titi's image on T-shirts and posters. Her name was chanted along with other victims, as a way to affirm that they would not be forgotten. A social activist group even established a scholarship fund in her name to support young trans people pursuing their education. While the community turned the loss into a fighting force, broader public opinion gradually cooled. The press turned to reporting on new cases. That silence hurt her family even more. They fear that one day, when people mention Titi, they will only vaguely remember, "Oh, that was a girl who was killed in 2017. One detective on the investigation team once told the press privately, "There are cases that keep us up at night for years. Titi is one of them. There is nothing more painful than having to tell the victim's family that we have nothing new." That confession exposed the truth. Despite their good intentions, the police were helpless against a fragile wall of evidence. The coldness of the case had another consequence. Theories and rumors began to spread. On social media, many people fabricated that Titi might have been involved in drugs or involved in illicit relationships. These malicious rumors had no evidence, but spread quickly, damaging her reputation. The family reacted violently, asserting that Titi was completely innocent, that her life revolved around work, family, and friends. But the internet is unforgiving once rumors spread. It is difficult to stop. Yet the LGBTQ+ community has not let her story be forgotten. They have created annual memorials, where every year on the anniversary of her murder, people gather, light candles, and read her name loudly in the dark. When we read Titi's name, we are not only remembering, but we are also sending a message that her life mattered, and that justice for her is still being demanded, said one activist. At the national level, Titi is mentioned in annual reports on violence against transgender people. Her name is on a long list of victims who have not found justice. The list is an indictment of society, a reminder that justice has not come to everyone. Titi's family, despite their grief, still tries to keep her memory alive. Her sister says that every time she sees a rainbow after the rain, she thinks of Titi. She always said rainbows were a sign that things would get better. But since she died, rainbows have been both beautiful and heartbreaking to me. As time passed, the Titi Dangerfield case began to fade into oblivion at the official level. There were no more press releases, no more press conferences. Her file sat in a cold cabinet, waiting for some miracle, maybe a confession, or a witness who decided to come forward. But in the hearts of those who loved her, Titi never disappeared. They kept her alive through stories, photos, tributes. Titi Dangerfield became more than a name in the news. She was a symbol of a community still struggling to be seen, protected, and treated fairly. And yet the big question lingered. Will justice ever come? Will her killer ever face the truth? Or will Titi's death forever be one of countless unsolved cases, nameless ghosts in the criminal record? Time has passed, but for Titi Dangerfield's family and friends, the pain has never lessened. Holidays, birthday parties, and family gatherings have become bittersweet moments. Every time they look around the dinner table, they notice the empty chair that Titi should have sat in. No one says it out loud, but they all know that absence is a wound that will never heal. Titi's mother kept most of her daughter's belongings in her old room. The closet still has Titi's favorite colorful dresses hanging. On the dressing table is the red lipstick she used before the fateful party. Some nights, she quietly walks into that room, opens the closet, and inhales deeply, as if the lingering scent is a fragile thread connecting her to her lost child. Meanwhile, the LGBTQ+ community continues to turn Titi's death into a powerful call to action. Many Atlanta-based activist groups have named her a symbol of the anti-trans violence movement. They hold workshops, share how to protect themselves, and demand greater accountability from the legal system. As one prominent activist once said, "When we talk about Titi, we are not just remembering a victim. We are talking about a woman who had dreams, a family, and friends. And more importantly, we are reminding society that this violence cannot continue." On social media platforms, every year on the anniversary of Titi's death, hundreds of posts appear with the hashtag bearing her name. Photos of Titi smiling brightly are shared everywhere, accompanied by the heartbreaking but powerful words, "Justice for Titi Dangerfield." However, no one denies a harsh reality. The perpetrator is still out there. Not a single name, not a single face has been brought to justice. The silence became a haunting shadow for the family. They wondered, had the killer passed them on the street? Had he smiled, pretending to be a normal person, while harboring the darkest secret? A close friend of Titi's once confessed that she often looked at the crowd and wondered, Could one of them be the one who fired the shots that night? That fear was hard to quell, because when justice is not served, every stranger can become an imaginary suspect. The police, although still keeping the case open, made no significant progress. They could only hope for a chance clue in the future, a confession, a DNA sample discovered, or a witness suddenly deciding to speak up. But year after year, it never happened. Meanwhile, the family's patience was tested. They wrote to the police, asked for updates, attended community meetings, and even contacted legal organizations to apply pressure. But they knew that with a case as lacking evidence as this, the chances of finding the killer were slim. Their pain grew as they watched other cases being solved. They saw on the news that other victims had found justice, while Titi had not. Each time, Titi's mother would whisper, "When will it be my daughter's turn?" In the years since Titi's death, Atlanta has changed. New buildings have been built, new roads have been widened, new people have come and gone. But in the LGBTQ+ community, her memory remains fresh. They tell Titi's story to younger generations, as a warning and a beacon. Some of her friends have even turned their grief into personal motivation. Some have joined human rights organizations. Others have become anti-violence activists. They say Titi sacrificed her life to wake up society, and they will not allow that sacrifice to be forgotten. Yet, despite all the efforts, one fact remains: Titi Dangerfield is no more. The dream of a happy life, of love, of a future, all were taken away in a matter of seconds on a fateful night, and the one who took it away never paid the price. That is the most haunting void in this case. It is not only a void in the family's heart, but also a void in justice, in the community's faith in the system that protects them, a question that echoes through the years. If Titi had not been a transgender woman of color, would her case have been solved sooner? Many activists say the delay and lack of progress in the investigation reflects systemic bias where victims from marginalized groups are often left behind. Today, when people talk about Titi Dangerfield, they are talking about more than just a murder. People talk about an icon, a testament to the injustices faced by so many. Her story has transcended Atlanta, becoming part of a national conversation about violence, justice, and LGBTQ+ safety. But for her family, no title or symbol is enough. To them, Titi is not a movement or a hashtag. She is a daughter, a sister, a friend, and all they want is justice, a truth revealed, a name punished. Until that happens, Titi Dangerfield's story will remain an unfinished song, a sad melody that resonates in the hearts of those who loved her. Over time, Titi Dangerfield's case has become a scar on the face of Atlanta, no longer bleeding, but never gone. Many outsiders may forget, but for those who loved her, the pain is still present every day. And for the LGBTQ+ community, Titi's death has become part of a long-term fight for recognition and protection. In the years since, journalists, documentary filmmakers, and social organizations have continued to refer to Titi. They see her death as a symbol of injustice and a wake-up call. Because when someone is murdered for being true to their true self, it is no longer a personal tragedy. It is a failure of society. Numerous memorial events are held each year. People lit candles, brought flowers, and read aloud the name of Titi Dangerfield, along with hundreds of other victims, on Day of Remembrance for Transgender Murders. Each candle lit up like a soul that has not found peace, and each name called out like an affirmation: You are not forgotten. Yet, the heartbreaking thing is that every year, the list of victims grows longer. Titi is just one of many. Cold statistics show that transgender women of color remain the group most at risk of violence. They are often attacked, discriminated against, and when they die, justice is often slow to come or never comes. Titi's case, to this day, remains unsolved. No one has been charged, no trial has been held. The killer remains silent in the dark, leaving behind unanswered questions. And it is that silence that makes Titi's death all the more haunting. There was a time when people hoped that new technology, DNA testing, surveillance footage, or chance witnesses would bring a breakthrough. But all that was hope. The police kept the case open, but the family and community waited like a door that would never open. But even in tragedy, Titi Dangerfield left a legacy. Her story has prompted important conversations about safety, about protection, and about the legal system's responsibility to the vulnerable. Many young people in the LGBTQ+ community say they feel compelled to be more assertive, more involved, because they don't want Titi's death to be in vain. Her family, exhausted by grief, persevered. They shared photos, stories, and memories of Titi with the media. They wanted the world to remember her not just as a victim, but as a real person, a radiant, loving woman who longed for happiness. A close friend once said at a memorial service, "If you ever met Titi, you will never forget her. She had a smile that lit up a room, and she believed that everyone deserved the chance to love and be loved. But society did not give her that chance. And those of us who are left behind have a responsibility to change that." Looking back, the Titi Dangerfield case is more than a crime story. It is a portrait of the injustices that exist in society. Sexism, racism, and the delay of justice. It reminds us that justice is not always fair, and sometimes it comes too late or never comes at all. But at the same time, that story is also a testament to the power of the community. Even though they could not bring the perpetrator to light, those who loved Titi still turned their pain into action. They continued to fight, continued to love, and continued to tell the story, so that the name Titi Dangerfield would never be erased. The last image that many people remember of her is not that tragic night, but the days when she smiled brightly with her friends, the days when she believed in the future. And perhaps that is also how she wants to be remembered. Not as a victim, but as a person full of dreams and light. The final question still echoes. Who killed Titi Dangerfield? Perhaps we will never know. But one thing is certain. Her story will not be silenced. It will continue to live on in memories, in conversations, and in every step of the transgender justice movement. Because, as one activist once said, we cannot let justice sleep. Because when justice is silent, violence speaks. And Titi Dangerfield deserves better.